My name is Alara. In my previous life I was known as Alara, the baby mistakenly taken home by the Miller family, the one everyone treated as a walking curse. The man I loved was Julian, the son of a fallen soldier, abandoned and left with nothing. Together we shared a life of quiet desperation and fleeting warmth, weathering decades side by side. With my unwavering support, Julian climbed from obscurity to become a man of significant power, and I became the wife others envied. When I took my last breath, I believed my life had been one of purpose and fulfillment. I was wrong. The next thing I knew, I was reborn, my consciousness trapped within the helpless form of a newborn. And Julian, my husband of 55 years, had been reborn with me. What I never expected was that the very first thing Julian did in this new life was to find me in the hospital nursery and switch my identity bracelet with that of the Miller's biological daughter. His small, childlike hands performed the swap with a chilling precision that spoke of a premeditated plan. A wave of warmth washed over my tiny, underdeveloped heart. I remembered so clearly how many times in my past life I had told him, if I could live again, I would only want to grow up with my birth parents, not owe a debt to my adoptive ones. He had heard me. He had come here to change my fate. But before that fragile warmth could spread, I saw his eyes. The eyes of a 7-year-old boy, yet filled with an ancient, searing hatred. Those eyes, set in a child's face, locked onto mine. My tiny, wrinkled body could only manage a weak gurgle of confusion. Then his small hands, calloused already from some unknown hardship in this new life, clamped around my neck. A crushing pressure. The world, so new and bright, began to dim. My mind, so full of memories, screamed in silent, infantile terror. Julian. Just as suddenly he let go. I sucked in a desperate, ragged breath and burst into frightened, trembling sobs. From his lips came a childish voice, layered with the bitterness of the man I once knew. You stole Sienna's life, he hissed, the words a venomous whisper in the sterile air. You forced her to drift endlessly and you dragged my love into the grave. For countless days and nights, all I wanted was to strangle you. But even so, you were once my wife. In this life, it's best if we never have anything to do with each other again. I froze, my sobs catching in my throat. Only then did I understand. Our 55 years of marriage had been, in his eyes, nothing but a tomb. His heart had never belonged to me. From beginning to end, it had been completely possessed by the girl whose destiny I had unknowingly stolen, Sienna. Helpless, I could only watch as he scurried away, leaving me alone in my crib. The sharp cries of other newborns filled the air, but no one had noticed the attempted murder that had just taken place. The nurse who had carelessly fastened the wrong identification band around my ankle earlier was gone. Reborn as an infant, I was utterly powerless. Later, I was brought to a woman lying on the last bed in the delivery room. Mrs. Isabella Sterling, a diplomat known in political circles as the Steel Magnolia, held me gently in her arms. Her gaze was filled with a love so profound it felt like a balm on my wounded soul. Her soft question caught the attention of the man beside her, General Alexander Vance, one of the most promising young major generals in the country. He pondered for a moment, then spoke slowly. The moon goddess in the old myths is Selene. Our daughter must be destined for grace and beauty, shining like the moon among the stars. Selene. It's perfect. Isabella Sterling nodded with satisfaction. But at that moment, young Julian, who was hovering near the bed of Deputy Commander Miller's wife, spoke up. His voice was firm, too firm for a child. The name Selene has already been chosen by Deputy Commander Miller, he declared. General Vance, could you think of another name? Otherwise, the two children will share the same name and it will be confusing. General Vance's brow furrowed slightly. When did the Deputy Commander choose a name? I wasn't informed. Isabella, ever perceptive, noticed the sly glint in the boy's eyes but being kind-hearted didn't wish to argue. She tugged at her husband's hand. Alexander, just choose a different name. There's no need to quarrel with a child. Alexander Vance drew a deep breath and thought again. After a while he spoke, his voice softening as he looked at me. The willow blossoms are tender, their leaves fresh and pure. Let's call her Alara Vance. We won't burden her with grand expectations. I only hope she grows up happy, living this life carefree and untainted. Isabella's eyes brimmed with tears. Through the single word pure, she felt the boundless love her husband had for their daughter. My own tiny heart warmed as well. I no longer cared that in Julian's eyes there was only Sienna. Because now I had parents who saw only me. In my past life, because of that nurse's mistake, I had become the unlucky daughter despised by everyone in the Miller family. Compared to Sienna, who grew up cherished and adored, I was raised in a household that valued sons over daughters. Worn down little by little while she danced ballet on stage and became the belle of the art troupe, I was nothing more than a servant in the Miller home, washing clothes and cooking meals for their spoiled son. Julian was the child of a soldier who had served under Deputy Commander Miller, born after his father died in battle. His mother abandoned him at the Miller's gate and vanished. Unable to bear society's scorn, Deputy Commander Miller was forced to adopt Julian, but a couple who scarcely cared for their own children could never be kind to an adopted one. I was a servant and Julian was just a hired hand. Sharing the same fate, we sympathized with each other, leaned on one another and lived out our days side by side. I had thought of him as my entire world. But in truth, in his eyes, there had long been nothing but the radiant figure of Sienna on that stage. Now, cradled in my mother Isabella's arms, I made a silent vow. In this life I would not support him in rising to the top again. I would not waste my devotion on a man whose heart housed a grave for another woman. This time I would live for myself. I would pursue my own forgotten dream, one that had been buried under a lifetime of service. The vast, boundless freedom of the sky. The first test of my new resolve came sooner than I expected. A few days later, from the comfort of my crib, I heard familiar voices outside our door. Julian, with little Sienna in tow, had come begging for food. My mother, with her innate kindness, was rinsing rice, likely to prepare a meal for them as she often had in my past life. A surge of panic and anger, emotions too raw for an infant, welled up inside me. I would not let her kindness be exploited again. I would not let these two who brought me nothing but pain intrude upon my new life. I opened my mouth and let out a piercing, desperate cry, so loud it made my mother's heart tremble. She immediately stopped what she was doing and rushed to my side, lifting me into her arms with both hands, pouring all her love into every embrace and every kiss. Because of this, she no longer had free hands to cook meals for Julian and Sienna. Strange, really. Normally I was a well-behaved baby. But every time Julian showed up with Sienna, I cried as if my heart would break, so loud it made the adults' hearts tremble. It was my first tiny act of rebellion in this new life, a shield made of an infant's wail to protect the love I had finally found. That night, lying together in bed, Isabella and Alexander spoke in hushed voices. What else could it be? Alexander said, gently poking my chubby cheek, his eyes crinkling with a smile. Our daughter just loves her mother. Julian and that little Sienna come begging for food every day. No one in the whole block can stand them anymore. Yet you're still kind enough to cook for them. Alara is just protecting you. Isabella burst out laughing. You're joking too much. He's just a baby. What would she know? But it's true. Those two Miller children are pitiful. Maybe you should find a way to help them. Alexander shook his head. That's their family's affair. Even a judge would find it hard to interfere. Best not to get involved. Tomorrow my mother will come to look after you and the baby. Let her, with her thick skin, say a few words to the Miller family. At the very least they should make sure those kids are fed. The kindness of my new parents would never allow them to stand by idly. And I, from my mother's secure arms, would watch the world I once knew begin to shift and change, one consequence at a time. The very next day my grandmother, a woman with a voice that could carry across a parade ground, stood in the middle of the courtyard and scolded the Miller family at the top of her lungs for neglecting their children. Neighbors who had once turned a blind eye began to poke their heads out of their doors, one by one. A chorus of murmurs rose, everyone finally vocalizing their disgust at the Miller couple's outrageous behavior. Shamed into a corner, Mr. and Mrs. Miller dragged Julian home and beat him mercilessly. The pocket money we give you is for school, for necessities. You dare to waste it again and we'll throw you out like your mother did. Mr. Miller roared, his face purple with rage. We're busy with 100 things. Can't you be a little more sensible? Julian, beaten until his small body was covered in angry welts, had no choice but to bow his head under the false accusation. I'm sorry, uncle, he forced out, his voice tight with pain. From now on I won't spend carelessly. It was all a performance for the neighbors. Afterward, Mrs. Miller, pretending to be generous, pulled out a $20 bill and stuffed it into Julian's hand. In front of everyone, though his lip was still bleeding, he snatched the money and rushed off to buy milk and bread for Sienna. Cradled in my mother Isabella's arms, I watched the entire scene unfold. I couldn't help but remember my past life, when I had given up my own portion of food to a hungry Julian, only to suffer savage beatings from my adoptive parents. The truth was always clear. Love, or the absence of it, could never be hidden. With me, Julian had always been weak, always needing someone to care for him. But with Sienna, he was strong, enduring beatings and humiliation, willing to kneel just so she could live a little more comfortably. Thinking back on the suffering I endured in my last life, now all of it was falling, piece by piece, onto Julian instead. Strangely enough, I felt a profound sense of peace. There was nothing left for me to regret. Time flowed like running water. In the constant soundtrack of shouting and beatings from the Miller household, where Julian was scolded and whipped daily, I grew up day by day, surrounded by the love of my parents and the indulgence of my grandparents. I slowly blossomed into a gentle, graceful young woman. My father's steady presence and my mother's gentle strength became the pillars of my world, a world so different from the one I had known. Because my school was a little far from our housing block, Sienna often asked to ride in my father's car on the way to class. Over time, she began to treat me like a close sister, often confiding her secrets with a familiarity I found both ironic and irritating. She didn't just complain about her family's obsession with their son, but also shared her girlish crushes without hesitation. "Do you know," she whispered to me one day in the back of the car, her eyes dreamy, "I really like the youngest son of General Thorne. I heard he's applying to be a pilot this time too. Your dad has such wide connections. Do you think he could help me find out his results early?" I simply smiled noncommittally and looked out the window. Her shallow preoccupations were a universe away from my own aspirations. She lived in a constant state of want, always looking for the next man to elevate her status, while I was quietly nurturing a dream that was mine and mine alone. One afternoon she came to me, her face a mask of frustration. "It's just not fair, Alara. You have everything. Loving parents, a beautiful home, respect. You're sitting on a pot of gold, living in the clouds. How could you possibly understand my suffering?" Suffering? He hardly knew the meaning of the word. Compared to my past life, washing clothes, cooking, cleaning, serving an entire household like an indentured servant, her life now was one of relative ease. Even without her parents' protection, she was always cherished and shielded by Julian. She never once had to lift a finger for the heavy, soul-crushing chores I had endured. "You'll see," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand when I mentioned a quiet, studious boy named Marcus from our class. "Marcus will end up just like Julian, abandoned by his mother, dumped into some housing unit to be a servant, a janitor. There's no future there." I sighed quietly. How could she ever guess that Marcus's future would be one of honor, that he would one day become a brilliant scientist, celebrated for his mind? I felt only relief that he would likely escape the snare of a girl as calculating as Sienna. That night, my parents sat together in the living room discussing Marcus's situation. His mother had remarried and left him behind after his father, a decorated officer, had died in a training accident. I saw sorrow and deep compassion in their eyes as they spoke. It was clear they were considering adopting him. When they asked my opinion, they did so carefully, their voices soft, afraid I might object. At that time, the bias of favoring sons over daughters was still heavy in many families, and they feared I wouldn't welcome a strange boy into our peaceful home. In my previous life, it had been Sienna who had strongly opposed her parents taking in another child. But this time I looked at my parents, at the love and concern in their faces, and I spoke with a firmness that surprised even me. "Marcus's father was a hero," I said, my voice clear. "We can't let a hero's child live in tears. Please share with him the same love you give me. I will love and care for Marcus with all my heart." The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. The next day Marcus was brought home. He was a thin, quiet boy with intelligent eyes that held a world of pain. I greeted him warmly, addressing him politely as Big Brother. When a bowl of steaming white rice was placed in front of him at the dinner table, his eyes welled up and tears spilled silently down his cheeks. "Don't cry," I told him gently, passing him a handkerchief. "From now on you have a little sister to protect you. No one will dare bully you again." No one knew what he had endured during those few days in the orphanage, the feeling of being utterly alone in the world. He nodded hard, wiped his tears with the back of his hand, and then bent over his food, eating as if he hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. In that moment he looked so much like Julian in my past life when he was first taken in from the streets. Except for one crucial difference. Julian had never deserved that hot bowl of rice. Marcus, with his quiet dignity and brilliant mind, truly did. My new life was falling into a beautiful, supportive pattern. I had a brother, parents who adored me, and a future that was mine to shape. But the ghosts of the past were not yet done with me. Sienna, seeing the stability and warmth of our household, began to look upon it with a covetous eye. During recess at school a few days later, she shoved a pale pink envelope into my hands. I blinked in surprise. "Is this a love letter for Marcus?" I asked, my tone neutral. She smiled casually as if discussing the weather. "It's a love letter. I want him back." I was baffled. "But aren't you chasing after General Thorne's youngest son? His name is Liam Thorne, right?" She lifted her chin proudly. "That's in the past. Liam didn't even apply for the pilot exams. He said he wanted to be a military doctor. Technical officers like that will never rise high. Forget it. We're not a match." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "But Marcus didn't apply to be a pilot either." She laughed, a careless, tinkling sound. "I know. Even if he didn't. But Marcus got accepted into the youth program at the prestigious Ethelred Aeronautics Academy. Whether he earned it on his own or through your family's connections, being able to get into that class makes him a rare genius. I'm not blind to potential." I curled my lips in distaste. "But you dumped Marcus so cruelly before. Are you sure he'll accept this letter from you?" Sienna's eyes gleamed with unshakable confidence. "Of course. With this face of mine, what boy wouldn't fall for me? Even that bookworm Julian you know as well as I do follows my every word. And that's all thanks to my looks. All I have to do is toss him a little emotional bait and he's obedient like a puppy. Just yesterday I lied and said I wanted to save money to buy a house so we could get married. He immediately handed me the allowance his father gave him and bought me this dress." She twirled, showing off a cheap but flashy dress. "Over 1,000 yuan. It's gorgeous, right? If Marcus sees me like this, he'll definitely agree to come back to me." Perhaps because Julian pampered her so much, Sienna no longer had any sense of shame. That evening, when I went home, I gave the letter to Marcus and quietly advised him to stay far away from her. A girl like her, shameless and manipulative, wasn't worth his time or his heart. But words weren't enough. Marcus, his jaw set with a determination I was coming to admire, decided to deliver the letter back to the Miller household himself. He wanted to look Sienna in the eye and tell her to keep her distance from me. But when he arrived at the dilapidated Miller home, it was Julian, just back from a part-time job, who opened the door. Marcus handed him the letter, his expression serious and firm. "Tell Sienna to stay away from my little sister, Alara," Marcus said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We don't belong to the same world. Give this back to her. I will never, for the rest of my life, go back to her." After Marcus left, Julian quietly opened the envelope. Inside, beyond the bold and suggestive words, were several large, explicit photos of Sienna. His head felt like it was about to explode. The carefully constructed image of his pure, suffering Sienna shattered in an instant. When Sienna returned home later, counting her allowance money and looking smug, Julian immediately grabbed her arm, his face pale and strained. "What's this letter about?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and hurt. "And these pictures, what do they mean?" Sienna remained calm as if nothing had happened. She even pointed a finger at Julian's face and sneered. "What else could it mean? Isn't it obvious? I like Marcus. I was with him before and now I want him back. That's it." With that, she strutted proudly past him into the house. Julian stood frozen in the doorway, the pink envelope crumpled in his fist, the seeds of a deep, festering betrayal taking root in his heart. The perfect love he had sacrificed everything for, the love for which he had tried to strangle a newborn baby, was revealing itself to be a cheap and tawdry illusion. And for the first time in this new life, I felt a flicker of something other than hatred for him, a faint, distant pang of pity for the fool he had always been. Julian went mad. Ignoring whether neighbors were watching from their windows, he roared after Sienna, his voice cracking with a pain that was both juvenile and ancient. "Sienna, you told me you would only ever love me. You said you'd marry me, build a family with me. Was all of that a lie? She stopped in the middle of the messy living room and turned to face him, her expression one of pure contempt. She snorted coldly. Of course it was a lie. Otherwise, why would you willingly work like a servant for my family? You're bold, I'll give you that. With your lowly background, you think you can dream of marrying the future star of the art troupe. 4 years the troupe had held auditions, but Sienna never once passed. In her eyes, the only reason was because her family lacked the right connections. Once her father was promoted or she latched onto someone with high enough status, joining the troupe would be only a matter of time. She believed becoming the shining belle of the stage would be as easy as turning her hand, but those around her, the few neighbors still lingering, couldn't help but laugh at her brazen delusion. Sienna, however, mistook their laughter for agreement. In her eyes, Julian was nothing more than a toad dreaming of swan meat. Julian's eyes burned a furious red. He had never imagined that after giving her everything, his sweat, his dignity, the very memory of his past life, all he would receive in return was such open contempt. Only if you get into the youth program at the Aeronautics Academy like Marcus or pass the pilot selection would I ever consider it, she said coolly, picking at her nails. Then I wouldn't even need you to chase me. I'd throw myself at you. Julian clenched his fists, his knuckles white. If I pass the pilot exam, will you marry me? Sienna burst out laughing. It was as if she had just heard the funniest joke of her life. You? Passing the pilot exam? Don't make me laugh. But Julian's expression was deadly serious, the face of a man making a desperate last-ditch bargain. I will pass. I just need you to answer me. Will you marry me or not? People nearby, enjoying the drama, began to chime in, encouraging her. He treats you so well, one woman called out. What harm would there be in marrying him? If he really does pass the pilot exam, it proves he's talented. Give him a chance. Sienna hesitated for a moment, her eyes calculating. Finally she nodded, a condescending tilt of her head. Fine. If you really pass the pilot exam, I'll marry you. But remember, becoming a pilot isn't easy. In the entire military district, maybe one person passes in a whole year. Julian didn't flinch. Don't worry. I'll make it happen. In my past life, Julian really had passed the pilot exam, but that was when he had consistent food, proper clothing, and no burdens on his shoulders other than his own ambition. Things were different now. The Miller family's youngest son had just been born and needed constant care. Mr. and Mrs. Miller never cooked a meal themselves. A household of 5 mouths relied on a single fixed income that was already stretched thin. There was no money for extra rice, no money for meat or vegetables, not even sometimes for salt. Beyond basic expenses, Mr. Miller still needed to entertain colleagues, while Mrs. Miller played mahjong until midnight. Julian poured every penny of the modest allowance left by his late father into supporting the entire Miller family. But it was still like trying to fill a bottomless pit. Milk powder, diapers, coal briquettes, electricity bills, every expense pressed down on his young shoulders. He had no time to study, no time to train physically, and no chance to build the connections that had once helped him rise. Day after day he was trapped in endless, inescapable chores. I watched his struggle from a distance, my heart a confusing mix of cold satisfaction and that unwelcome lingering pity. He was reaping the harvest of the seeds he himself had sown when he switched our fates. One day he stopped me on the path leading home from school. His face was earnest, shadowed with exhaustion, his eyes a little red. "Ilara," he said softly, his voice lower than it should have been for a boy his age. "I know things. I know your father did some questionable things to climb the ladder. If you're willing, I want to help you." I instantly understood what he meant. He was talking about the false accusation from my past life, the one that claimed my father had sold his daughter for power, the same charge that had ruined Alexander Vance's career. Julian could no longer wait for a natural promotion. He wanted to expose it early, to force my father into political exile, thereby clearing the path for his adoptive father's ascent. But the truth was, my father had never sold me out. In my past life, it was Sienna who couldn't resist the temptation of money and influence, becoming the mistress of a married man. My father, to protect her reputation and, by extension, the family's honor, had shouldered the blame and taken the fall. I curled my lips into a cold smile and looked straight at Julian, the boy who hadn't spoken a single kind word to me in more than a decade of this new life. "Sorry," I said, my voice flat and dismissive. I don't understand what you're talking about. Julian pressed his lips together, a flash of frustration in his eyes. I know this puts you in a difficult position, but if you keep hiding the truth, I'll have no choice but to act myself. I simply turned and walked away, the weight of his threat feeling insignificant against the fortress of my new life. I said nothing to my parents. I didn't need to. The world had its own way of balancing the scales. 2 days later, Colonel Croft, the very man who had once been disgraced in the scandal, arrived at the Miller home with 2 of his subordinates. Without a word of warning, he smashed a heavy truncheon into Julian's leg right there in the front yard. The sound of the impact was sickening, a dull crack followed by Julian's sharp, agonized cry. He clutched his shattered leg, writhing on the ground, wailing for help. The screams were heartbreaking, a raw sound of pure suffering. But in the courtyard, only children lingered, their faces pale with fear. No adult stepped forward. Not a single person dared to help him. All they could do was watch him groan in unbearable pain, his future as a pilot shattering along with the bones in his leg. Colonel Croft took a long drag on his cigarette, sneering coldly down at Julian. So it was you, brat. You dared to report me, costing me my promotion this year. You think just because your father died in service, you can do whatever you want? Every leader has family who died in service. You dare to play me like this? Julian ground his teeth against the blinding pain and shouted hoarsely, "Do it then. If you've got the guts, kill me. You may have silenced me this time, but in the future, I'll come after you again and again." Colonel Croft paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing. In his memory, he'd never had any real grudge against the boy. But since Julian had declared war so openly, he couldn't afford to let it slide. His hand moved toward the gun at his waist. Just then Sienna appeared holding a cold can of soda. She walked up sweetly, a practiced smile on her face, and playfully tugged on Colonel Croft's arm. "Oh, come on, Colonel," she cooed, her voice laced with a suggestive sweetness. "Just let him go this time, okay? For me." She wore a cheap floral print dress, her loose hair falling over her shoulders, her youthful radiance a stark contrast to the scene of violence. Colonel Croft glanced at her, and for a moment, it was as if his chest tightened. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a different, more predatory glint. "All right," he said, his voice softening unervingly. "Since my little Sienna has spoken up, I'll let him off this once." Her soft, drawn-out "Thank you, Colonel Croft," was almost intoxicating. In that instant, Julian no longer felt the searing pain in his leg. His mind sharpened with a sudden, horrifying clarity. He staggered forward, his broken leg dragging, and grabbed Sienna's wrist, his grip like a vice. From now on, he spoke each word through gritted teeth, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You are never to see that man again. Do you hear me? Never." Sienna yanked her hand away as if his touch were filthy. "If it weren't for me just now, you'd already be dead. What right do you have to order me around? With a temper like that, you think you'll ever become a pilot? You can't even walk straight." From that day on, something in Julian broke. He stopped studying, stopped training. The dream of the pilot's exam evaporated. Instead, he trailed Sienna like a haunted shadow everywhere she went, his limp a constant physical reminder of his downfall. But no matter how watchful he was, he couldn't stop her from becoming entangled with Colonel Croft. Unlike me, Sienna had no father who was a general, no mother who was a diplomat. Her parents favored their son and ignored her completely. The neighbors in the housing block and our classmates at school didn't respect her either. So, gossip about her spread freely, and before long her sordid relationship with the married colonel was the worst-kept secret in the district. I focused on my own path. While their world descended into a toxic drama, I buried myself in books on physics and aerodynamics. I trained my body, building the strength and endurance I would need. The sky was calling me, a siren song of freedom and purpose, and I was determined to answer. The scandal broke with the force of a summer storm. One afternoon, Colonel Croft's wife, a woman known for her fiery temper, stormed into our housing block. She didn't bother with subtlety. She found Sienna preening by the communal water pump, grabbed her by her long hair and tore her cheap floral dress right off her shoulders. The slaps that followed were savage, rhythmic, and public. "Homewrecker! Shameless little tramp!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the brick buildings. I watched from my bedroom window, my physics textbook open and forgotten on my desk. A crowd gathered, but not a single person stepped in to help. They just stood there watching, their faces a mixture of disgust and morbid fascination. Some even laughed. I saw Julian then standing at the edge of the crowd, his fists clenched, his face a mask of torment. But he didn't move. His eyes were red, but he couldn't even shed a tear. He was utterly paralyzed, trapped between his obsession and his powerlessness. At that very moment, the distinct putter of the postman's motorcycle echoed through the courtyard. Even through her humiliation and pain, Sienna heard it. She shoved the colonel's wife away, clutching the torn fabric to her chest, and bolted toward the sound, her eyes wild with a desperate hope. "Is it Julian's admission letter?" she screamed at the postman, her voice raw. "He passed, didn't he? Tell me he passed." After the scandal, Sienna's parents had despised her, wanting to strangle her for disgracing the family. Cast out and with nowhere else to turn, she had pinned her last fraying hopes on Julian's promise. She had tried to lure him back with sweet words and pitiful acts. And though Julian knew full well how fickle and unfaithful she was, he was still trapped in her orbit. He had promised her he would find a way, that he would still give her a future. He had taken a job in the logistics wing of the local airbase, repairing ground equipment and cleaning hangars. A far cry from a pilot, but a stable mid-level engineering position. Unfortunately for her, the admission letter wasn't for Julian. "Sorry," the postman said, pulling a thick, official-looking envelope from his bag. "This letter is for Alara Vance." I walked out of my house, my steps calm and measured. The crowd's attention shifted from the spectacle of Sienna's shame to me. I could feel their gazes, a mix of curiosity and respect. I took the letter from the postman and signed my name with a firm, steady hand. The postman smiled warmly. "Congratulations, Cadet Alara Vance. From today on, you are officially a pilot in training of the Ethelred Aeronautics Academy." I returned his smile. "Thank you." Sienna froze, her tear-streaked, bruised face draining of all color. "You?" she stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You applied for the pilot exam? Since when?" I tilted my head, allowing a small, cold smile to touch my lips. "While you were busy scheming about which man to seduce next." Her face flushed a mottled, furious red. "How dare you mock me?" I didn't bother to respond. Just then Marcus and Liam Thorne walked into the courtyard, each holding a bouquet of wildflowers. They came straight toward me, their faces beaming with genuine pride. "Congratulations, Alara," Marcus said, handing me his bouquet. "We never doubted you for a second." Liam, who had indeed chosen the path of a military doctor, nodded, his eyes soft. "The sky suits you." Sienna's face twisted as though it might explode. The two boys she had once pursued and discarded were now standing in front of me, celebrating my success. The comparison was too cruel, the irony too sharp. "And you accused me of seducing men," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You're the real expert, snaring two at once." She opened her mouth to sling more insults, but Marcus and Liam didn't give her the chance. They stepped in front of me in unison, forming a protective wall between me and her vitriol. "I've warned you enough times already," Marcus said, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. "Stay away from my little sister." Hearing those words from two boys who had once been captivated by her, Sienna's eyes instantly welled with tears of pure rage. At that moment, Julian finally limped over, intending to pull her away before she humiliated herself further. But Sienna could no longer restrain her fury. She turned on him, the source of all her current misery, and slapped him hard across the face. The crack echoed in the sudden silence of the courtyard. "You think I should listen to you?" she shrieked. "Who do you think you are? If you weren't so useless, if you had actually passed the pilot exam, I wouldn't be embarrassed like this. And you still dream of marrying me? Keep dreaming, you worthless fool." Her cruel, public rejection hung in the air, making everyone uncomfortable. None of us wanted to be dragged into their drama any further. Marcus, Liam, and I turned and walked back toward my house, leaving the broken couple amidst the staring, judgmental eyes of the neighborhood. Back in the safety and warmth of my living room, Liam sighed, his medical mind already analyzing the damage. "You know, Julian was only 1 point short of passing the pilot's physical. If the Miller family hadn't forced him to do so much manual labor, if he'd had proper nutrition, maybe he really could have made it." Marcus nodded, ever the pragmatist. "That's true. If he hadn't fallen into the Miller family and especially Sienna's hands, with his mind and innate ability, he might have achieved great things. Their words were right. In my past life, Julian had built a formidable career for himself. The pity was that he never knew how to cherish what he had, always longing for a ghost. I didn't know if he ever regretted trading my fate with Sienna's, but I was truly deeply grateful. Because of his single hate-filled act, I had been returned to my real parents. I didn't say any of this. I simply looked at the acceptance letter in my hands, the thick paper embossed with the Academy's eagle crest. This was my ticket out, my path to the freedom I had craved for 2 lifetimes. I don't care about what might have been for Julian, I said softly but with conviction. I only care about what will be for me. My parents came in then, their eyes shining. My mother hugged me tightly and my father clapped me on the back, his pride a tangible force. In that moment, surrounded by love and support, the cries of Sienna and the silent despair of Julian felt like echoes from a distant, fading nightmare. My future was written not in the dirt of a dusty courtyard, but in the limitless blue of the sky. Time, which had once dragged in the Miller household, now began to fly for me. At the Ethelred Aeronautics Academy I found my purpose. The roar of engines was a symphony, the complex physics of flight a beautiful puzzle, and the strict discipline a structure that shaped my resolve into steel. I thrived. While Sienna's reputation rotted away completely in our old neighborhood, mine was being forged in the fires of rigor and excellence. I learned later that after the scandal with Colonel Croft, Sienna had cycled through several more men, each treating her as nothing more than a passing amusement. No decent young man from a respectable family would go near her. She was adrift, a tarnished commodity in a society that valued purity. Julian, with his skilled hands and a desperate need for stability, managed to secure a permanent position in the logistics unit attached to our academy. He repaired aircraft components and cleaned hangars. It was honest work, a mid-level engineering position that could have been a foundation for a respectable life. I often saw him on the training grounds, a solitary figure pushing a cart of tools or wiping down a canopy. Our eyes would sometimes meet across the tarmac, but we never spoke. It was as if an unspoken agreement from the delivery room held firm. We were strangers. Sometimes in the cavernous academy cafeteria, we'd end up at neighboring tables. I could feel his gaze on me, a heavy, lingering weight. My fellow cadets, unaware of our history, often teased me. "Looks like the quiet guy from logistics has a crush on you, Vance," they'd joke. "You've got quite the charm." But only I knew those weren't looks of admiration. They were filled with a deep, gnawing regret. I could see it clearly. Julian regretted letting go of me. He regretted switching my fate in that hospital room. He regretted ever loving Sienna, the woman who had publicly shattered him. He was living the life of quiet desperation he had once feared while I was soaring. During one of my combat training flights, I executed a complex maneuver that earned a rare word of praise from my notoriously stern instructor. After landing my fighter jet squarely in its assigned position, my heart still thrumming with adrenaline, Julian was there, waiting by the hangar entrance. He approached me, his limp more pronounced than usual. "Congratulations," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I heard about your performance review. Top of your class." I pulled off my flight helmet, my hair damp with sweat. "Thank you," I replied, my tone neutral. He gave a helpless, almost pathetic shrug. "And congratulations to you too. I heard you're marrying Sienna soon." The statement was so absurd I almost laughed. "Am I supposed to congratulate you on that?" His shoulders slumped. "She's pregnant. She insists the child is mine. The Miller family, afraid of losing what little face they have left, says they've raised me all these years, so I have to take responsibility. I have to accept her." I just looked at him, this man who had once held the power of life and death over me, now trapped by a chain of his own forging. That child she carried, given her recent history, its paternity was a question mark I didn't care to ponder. I didn't see anything pitiful about it. It was just another consequence. Julian then asked me a question, his eyes searching my face as if looking for a ghost. "Why did you choose to become a pilot, Alara?" I curved my lips slightly, looking past him at the vast open sky, still painted with the contrails of other jets. "Probably because of my yearning for freedom," I said, my voice soft but clear. Before, I could only stand on the ground looking up at others flying high. Now that I've been given a second life, I refuse to go on as a sacrifice again. his brows furrowed, his eyes flickering with a desperate, dawning hope. Alara, could it be that you also? He couldn't finish the sentence. That you also remember? I cut him off sharply, my gaze turning to ice. Sorry, my parents and brothers are waiting for me to come home for dinner. I began to walk away, the concrete of the tarmac firm beneath my boots. But Julian, driven by a despair I could only imagine, chased after me, his limp making his gait awkward. Alara, wait. You really do remember everything, don't you? You remember everything that happened between us. I stopped and turned to face him, my expression as unyielding as the aircraft behind me. I don't know what you're talking about. Tears, silent and stark, slid down his grimy cheeks. 55 years, he whispered, his voice breaking. We were together for 55 years. 55 years of happiness. I sliced through his words, my voice as sharp and cold as a blade. But those 55 years also bred your hatred for me. You wanted to strangle me the moment I was just a newborn. Julian froze, his face turning ashen. The memory of what he'd done in the delivery room, the memory he had tried to bury, surged back with brutal force. I could see it in his eyes, the tiny wrinkled face, his small hands tightening. Wasn't it you? I continued, relentless. Who once said I had stolen Sienna's life? That I made her drift endlessly? That I dragged your love into the grave? You said that for countless days and nights all you wanted was to choke me to death. But since I had once been your wife, you wished that in this life we would have nothing more to do with each other. I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I'm only repeating what you already said. His face darkened, his body went stiff, and he was unable to utter another word. He stood there, utterly defeated, as I turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the echoes of his own hatred and the crushing weight of his regret. The past was a prison he had built for himself, and I had no intention of sharing his cell. In the end, Julian married Sienna. It was a small, shabby affair, with no one in attendance except the miserable Miller family and a few obligated neighbors. My family did not go. Soon after, Sienna gave birth to a baby boy. The child had a shock of blonde hair and blue eyes, features conspicuously absent from both Julian's and Sienna's genetic line. Julian, who was always quiet, grew even gloomier after the child's birth. He never lost his temper, never raised his voice. He just endured. But even his monumental forbearance, the same that had lasted 55 years with me without him daring to act on his murderous thoughts, was never enough for Sienna. Day after day, she berated him from the confines of their cramped, government-allocated apartment. If you weren't so useless, people wouldn't look down on me. What's the point of you burying yourself in those technical manuals? Think of a way to make real money. Other men all hold positions of power. But you're trash. You don't even have a real officer's commission. You've forced me to live in this shabby box. Their arguments were the soundtrack of their miserable existence. Fortunately, I had long since moved with my parents to a spacious, modern home on the other side of the base, far from the noise and the decay. My life was a whirlwind of advanced training, tactical simulations, and lift flight exercises. I was pushing the limits, earning the respect of my instructors and my peers. The sky was my sanctuary, a place where the pettiness of the past could not reach me. One day, after a particularly grueling session of training flights, I was drenched in sweat and exhaustion. Julian, now a permanent fixture in the logistics wing, brought me a canteen of cold water. It was part of his job, but there was a strange intensity in his eyes. Thank you, I said, taking the canteen. I studied him for a long moment. His eyes darted away, unable to hold my gaze. He was hiding something. A cold prickle of warning ran down my spine. There's a new navigation module in the lounge behind Hangar 3, he mumbled, not looking at me. The specs are on the table. Thought you might want to see them. I didn't expose him. I simply took a sip of water, the liquid doing little to quench a sudden deep thirst for answers. I decided to play along. All right. Show me. I followed him into the dim, windowless lounge. It was empty as I had suspected. The moment the door clicked shut behind us, I knew it was a trap. I turned to face him, my body coiling, ready for a fight. But it wasn't Julian who made the next move. The side door opened and Colonel Croft walked in. He was older, paunchier, his career having stalled completely after the last scandal. He leered at me, his eyes roaming over my flight suit with a filthy familiarity. Well, The little pilot princess. He slurred. He'd been drinking. You're playing the role so well. So serious, so dedicated. He took a step closer, reaching out a grubby hand to grope my arm. You don't have to work so hard, girl. As long as you obey me, be nice to me, I'll give you whatever you want. A good word in the right ear. Rage, white-hot and pure, exploded within me. I didn't hesitate. I channeled all my strength, all the combat training I had received, into a single vicious kick to his midsection. He wasn't expecting it. The air left his lungs in a loud whoosh and he doubled over, crashing to the concrete floor with a satisfying thud. Guard! I yelled, my voice echoing in the small space. Guard! Intruder! Within moments, base security swarmed the room. They hauled a groaning, cursing Colonel Croft to his feet. A quick inspection of the area revealed everything. A hidden camera, a bottle of liquor laced with a powerful sedative that Julian had slipped into my canteen. Under the stern gaze of the security chief, Julian broke down and confessed everything. Besides Croft, Sienna had also been deeply involved. She had masterminded the plan. When she was brought in for questioning, her carefully constructed composure shattered completely. She shrieked, her eyes wild with a decade of festering hatred, pointing a trembling finger at me. You stole my life. Why do you get to live so well? Why, in both our past and present lives, do I suffer while you thrive? I wanted Croft to ruin you. I wanted your father to be branded as a man who sold his daughter for power just like before. I wanted to destroy you, Alara. Why? In our past life, you were the respected wife of a leader and now you've become a national hero. I hate you. I despise you. She then turned on Julian, who sat slumped in a chair, a broken man. And you coward. You were so great in our past life, a man of real power. So why are you nothing but a useless worm in this one? You ruin me. I've never had a single day of happiness. I'd rather live wildly for 25 years and die than live another second in this miserable existence with you. And so it became clear. Sienna had remembered everything from her past life. She had carried the knowledge of her previous downfall and my previous success into this one, and the bitterness had festered into a venomous plot. Unable to accept her fate, she had incited a desperate Julian to drug me. They had schemed to recreate the scandal that had ruined my father in my past life, to drag the Vance name through the mud once more. But now, neither my identity nor the people who stood behind me were things Sienna could ever touch again. My father was a decorated general, my mother a revered diplomat. I was a decorated cadet on the fast track to becoming an officer. We were untouchable. Julian was taken away by the military police. Unlike Sienna, who had gone completely mad, screaming and thrashing, he almost looked relieved, as if a tremendous weight had finally been lifted from his soul. Liam Thorne, now a junior officer in the JAG Corps, was present for the formal arrest. He looked at Julian's strangely serene face. "Why are you smiling?" Liam asked, his voice laced with confusion. Julian glanced at me one last time, his gaze a complex tapestry of regret, shame, and a plea for absolution I would never grant. He answered, "This miserable life. I've had enough of it. If there's a next life, I hope I can start over again." I gave him a cold, utterly indifferent smile. "Then I hope you really do have a next life," I said, my voice clear and cutting in the tense room. "Because in this one you'll never again see me living well." His eyes widened, filled with a final, shocking wave of shock and endless regret. That was the last thing he saw before they led him away. My face free of hatred, free of love, free of him entirely. It was the greatest punishment I could have ever devised. The trials were swift and merciless. For conspiring to drug and compromise a military cadet, for attempted blackmail, for conduct unbecoming and treasonous intent, Julian, Sienna, and Colonel Croft were all sentenced to death. The legal machinery of the state, which I had once seen used to destroy my father in another life, now ground down upon them with impartial, brutal efficiency. There was no public outcry, no sympathetic pleas. Their story was one of sordid affairs, bitter jealousy, and a pathetic attempt to drag down someone who represented everything they were not: honor, discipline, and success earned through merit. They were condemned not just for their crimes but for their sheer wretched pettiness. On the day of their execution, a strange quiet settled over the airbase. It wasn't a silence of mourning but one of solemn finality. I didn't go to witness it. I had no desire to see the final physical end of the people who had haunted two of my lifetimes. Their story was over. Instead, I walked to the flight line. The morning sun was bright, glinting off the canopies of a row of next-generation fighter jets. The air was crisp, smelling of jet fuel and possibility. My crew chief handed me my helmet, his face etched with a respectful gravity. "Clear skies today, Major Vance," he said using my new rank. "Perfect flying weather." I nodded, pulling on my gloves. Perfect. I climbed into the cockpit of my fighter, the familiar ritual of strapping in, running system checks, and connecting my oxygen mask feeling more like a homecoming than a prelude to a mission. Today was the annual Grand Ethelred Aerospace military exercise. The air would be filled with the best pilots in the nation, a ballet of power and precision in the stratosphere. It was not a day for looking down at the dirt of the past but for looking up and forward. The control tower cleared me for takeoff. I pushed the throttle forward, feeling the immense raw power of the engine surge through the frame of the jet. The runway became a blur, and then with a gentle pull back on the stick the earth fell away. I soared. The feeling was, as always, one of absolute liberation. Up here there were no graves in anyone's heart, no stolen lives, no bitter regrets. There was only the pure physics of flight, the vast unbroken blue of the sky, and the silent majestic curve of the earth below. I executed my maneuvers with a flawless, instinctual grace, my mind completely one with the machine. I was no longer Alara, the swapped baby, the scorned wife, the target of hatred. I was Major Alara Vance, a pilot of the Ethelred Air Force, a guardian of the sky. As we flew in formation over the capital, I knew thousands of children were looking up, their small faces pressed against school windows, their hearts swelling with dreams sparked by the thunder of our engines. I was carrying those dreams with me. I was the embodiment of their what if. The exercise was a resounding success. When I landed, my tires smoking gently on the tarmac, I was met not just by my commanding officers but by my family. My mother, Isabella, her steel magnolia composure gone, had tears of pride streaming down her face. My father, Alexander, stood tall and straight, but the proud gleam in his eyes was unmistakable. Marcus was there now, Dr. Marcus Vance, a rising star in aerospace engineering, grinning from ear to ear. Even Liam Thorne was there in his medical corps uniform, clapping with the rest. They surrounded me, a wall of love and support that was my true inheritance, my real fortune. The past, with all its pain and complexity, had finally, completely lost its power over me. Julian and Sienna were gone, their toxic legacy erased. The life I had now was the one I had built, the one I had chosen, the one I deserved. In the quiet moments that followed, as the sun set and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, I made a silent promise to myself, to my country, to the very sky I loved. I would carry these dreams, mine and those of the children below, with me forever. I would guard the skies of my homeland for the rest of my life, protecting every inch of our motherland until my very last breath. This was my fulfillment. This was my peace. The sky was mine and I was free. The years that followed were not just a career, they were a testament. I accumulated accolades, not as trophies, but as milestones in a journey of continuous dedication. 5 meritorious service medals were joined by a distinguished flying cross, and finally, the highest honor a pilot could receive, the Star of Ethelred for valor. The ceremony was held at the presidential palace. When the medal was pinned to my dress uniform, its weight was not a burden but a confirmation. My parents, now silver-haired but still my pillars, held each other in the front row, their quiet sobs the only sound that mattered to me amidst the pomp and ceremony. My father, the general, later told me, his voice thick with emotion, "We named you Alara, only hoping you'd grow up safe and carefree. We never dreamed." He couldn't finish, simply shaking his head in wonder. My mother hugged me tightly. "You have given us more pride than any diplomat's speech ever could." My family had expanded. Marcus was now leading a groundbreaking research project on hypersonic flight, his name whispered with reverence in scientific circles. He had married a brilliant mathematician, and their home was filled with laughter and the quiet hum of intellectual curiosity. Liam Thorne had become the head of military medical research, his gentle bedside manner and sharp mind saving countless lives. He too had found happiness marrying a fellow doctor. We were all living proof that from the ashes of a painful past, beautiful futures could be built. The world of my first life, the world of the Miller household, felt like a faint, unpleasant dream. Occasionally, a rumor would surface that Sienna's son had been taken in by a distant relative and was trying to build a life under a different name, free from the shadow of his parents' infamy. I wished him well. He was an innocent in all of this. Julian and Sienna had become cautionary tales, their names synonymous with wasted potential and self-destructive bitterness, mentioned only in hushed tones when discussing the importance of integrity. One evening I was invited to speak at the graduation of the new cadet class at the academy. Standing at the podium looking out at the young eager faces filled with the same fire I had felt, I saw my own reflection in their ambitious eyes. "Do not let the past define your flight path," I told them, my voice echoing in the grand hall. "The sky does not care where you came from. It only asks for your courage, your discipline, and your respect. You are the guardians of the next horizon. Protect it well." After the speech, a young woman with sharp eyes and a determined set to her jaw approached me. "Major Vance," she said, saluting crisply. "Your story, they say you overcame incredible odds. That you rewrote your destiny." I smiled, a genuine, easy smile that came from a place of deep contentment. "I was given a second chance," I said simply. "And I chose to fly." That was the truth, stripped of all the pain and complexity. I had been given a second life, and I had chosen to spend it in pursuit of my own dream, surrounded by a love that was real and unconditional. The betrayal, the hatred, the attempted murder, they were all part of a narrative that no longer held any power over me. They were the crosswinds that had made me a stronger pilot, but they were not my destination. My destination was always the sky. Now, as the commander of the Ethelred Air Combat Division, my responsibilities are more strategic, but I still fly whenever I can. The moment the canopy closes and the engines ignite, that same feeling of absolute freedom returns. It is a feeling that Julian, in both his lives, never truly understood. He was always bound by his obsession, his pride, his regrets. He looked for his happiness in the reflection of another's approval, while I found mine in the boundless, accepting expanse above. As I guide my jet through a bank of clouds, the world below reduced to a beautiful miniature mosaic, I feel a profound sense of peace. This is where I was always meant to be. This is who I was always meant to be. Alara Vance. A daughter, a sister, a friend, a leader. A pilot. The horizon is clear, the future is bright, and my wings are unbroken. The story of the swapped baby, the cursed daughter, the scorned wife, is closed. My story, the one I wrote for myself, is forever soaring into the sun. The end.